Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya, and today we will take a look at India's contribution in World War I. Approximately 1.3 million Indian soldiers fought with valour and distinction during World War I as part of the British Indian Army, designated as Indian Expeditionary Forces. About 75,000 Indian soldiers laid down their life, and their sacrifice in this war was acknowledged by the armies and people of the allied nations on whose soil they fought. Almost a century after the First World War came to an end, these Indian soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice finally got their due, with Vice President Venkaiah Naidu inaugurating the Indian War Memorial in France on the occasion of 100th Armistice Day. For more on the contribution of Indian soldiers in the First World War, we have with us a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me start by introducing them to you, beginning with retired Major General Ravi Arora, Chief Editor of Indian Military Review. We also have with us Lieutenant Colonel Anil Kumar, Bhatt, a defense analyst, and we are also joined by Mr. Swapan Dasgupta, the Member of Parliament in Rajya Sabha. Welcome all of you gentlemen to Rajya Sabha television studios. Let me begin with you, General Arora, to try and understand this entire concept, because all of us know that World War I was fought and it was over by 1918, and India got its independence in 1947. So most of the younger generation does not seem to understand the correlation or the concept behind Indians fighting in World War I.
That's pitiable because, as you said, 1.3 million Indian soldiers were deployed in World War I. Also remember, World War II took place before we got our independence, and we don't have much to celebrate. We have not seen many celebrations, although in the last 3-4 years, the present government has started having some functions. We have the India Gate, which is a memorial to the soldiers who laid down their lives in the First World War and the Third Anglo-Afghan War of 1919. But we also have the light eternal flame at India Gate, where we go and pay homage, but we seldom pay homage to the martyrs who laid down their lives in First World War. Now, as you said, out of the 1.3 million soldiers who were deployed, 75,000 laid down their lives, 69,000 were wounded, and then in World War II, 87,000 were killed. So it was a big contribution. More of Indian soldiers' blood now lies mixed with the sands of France, Belgium, and Palestine, and what is now present-day Iraq and many other countries, than the blood of soldiers who have laid down their lives in wars after independence. So it was appropriate that after 100 years, at the centenary of the Armistice Day, which is 11 November 1918, that France erected a memorial and the Vice President of India went to unveil it. The present government is also committed to a war memorial for post-independence martyrs at India Gate, which will be inaugurated shortly. So this is a huge contribution of a colonial country fighting for their colonial masters, because Mahatma Gandhi at that time gave support and thought that the British would allow home rule sooner if we participated on their side in the war, but that was not to happen.
We'll come to that aspect as well, but let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Anil Bhatt here. On this aspect only, if we move further and we try and understand the kind of role which was played by the Indian soldiers on the foreign soil, and as is pointed out by Major General Ravi Arora, that this was not India's war, and Indian soldiers were part of the British Indian Army. So how do you look at the entire situation, the kind of valour which was displayed by them and the wars which were fought by them on a foreign soil for a foreign country?
It was, I think, it's close to, there are other figures of, the Indian component being close to 1.5 million, because there was an element of labor corps also of people from the northeast. This contribution was very, very substantial, and most important, it was a war-winning factor. The Indian soldier hats off to him, because he now was going for the first time serving in not just foreign lands where language is a major issue. The climate, everything was new to them. But that did not stop their the intrinsic valor and the discipline that the Indian Army started getting distinguished for from this war onwards.
Okay.
And there were, after they called it the Great War, the war to end all wars, unfortunately, which wasn't so, because
Soon after it was followed by another war.
It was followed by the Second World War, where our contribution was 2.5 million. We are today a 1.2 million army, looking after two adversaries, Pakistan and China, on two fronts. Anyway, now, as far as the Major General Arora pointed out, made an observation about the war memorials. Shortly after the war ended, the First World War ended, there were 5 war memorials dedicated to Indian troops, which were Chhatri, it's called Chhatri in Brighton, UK, Zehnsdorf Indian Cemetery in Germany, Neuchâtel in France, the Haifa War Memorial in Israel, Peter Military Cemetery, Malta, and the India Gate and Teen Murti. If the India Gate was, dedicated to 74,184 Indian soldiers killed throughout this war, the Teen Murti Memorial, now renamed as Teen Murti Haifa Chowk, that was a memorial to the Indian cavalry, for which the Israelis today, and Mr. Netanyahu expressed that, they, in the Israeli schools from class 3 to class 6, the bravery of Major Thakur Dalpat Singh of the Jodhpur Lancers, which was part of the Indian Cavalry Brigade, his and his comrades who laid down their lives, their stories are related, they're part of the history syllabus of in schools for classes 3 to 6. That just, Mr. Netanyahu didn't pull any punches when he, showered praise for, at the unveiling of the plaque at Teen Murti Haifa Chowk. He didn't pull his punches in, expressing his praise of, he says, we owe the liberation of Haifa to them. And what stands out, whether it is here or at Cambrai, where Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, our Vice President, inaugurated the
memorial.
The very, very recently made war memorial on 10th, is that these actions were fought, they were cavalry actions, and the First World War was the first war in which deadly weaponry, made its appearance. Artillery guns, high rate of fire machine guns, all kinds of aircraft, the tank, the first tank that ever was used,
was in World War I.
The Big Willie was in World War I. In fact, in the Battle of Cambrai, that's known for this, the first time the tanks being used to clear, to make a safe lane through minefields.
Okay.
And in both the cases of Haifa, Cambrai, the cavalry actions stood out.
So it was basically a very glorious past.
Not just that, the cavalry also had to fight dismounted, because this was the first time that we saw the most mucky kind of war, trench warfare. The rain had, softened the earth, and the trenches were mucked up with water, but all the more so, this is yet another very debilitating factor for
tough conditions.
Tough condition for the army, which the Indian army again
Okay.
Not only that, gas was used. I mean, you name
So
it.
all these aspects were
All
there.
these
Let's bring in Mr. Swapan Dasgupta here on trying to understand, Mr. Dasgupta, the way both the gentlemen here described Indian Army's valor and the tough conditions in which it was fought, and it is pretty much documented in the history as well. The way almost a dozen Victoria Cross were being bestowed upon Indian soldiers who were martyred there. How do you look at the way this entire period of this history is being viewed now in today's modern India, almost 100 years later?
Well, I think there are various facets if you look at it. It's undeniable, and I'm very glad that it's been resurrected, the seminal contribution of the Indian forces, both in the Great War, as the 1418 war is called, and in the Second World War. I think the substantial contribution is recognized. Having said that, the question will arise, what were we doing in a colonial war? And obviously that question is paramount in the minds of a lot of people who are hitherto been very squeamish about commemorating India's achievements in that. Now, I think it's important to recognize, firstly, that the Indian military, or let's put it this way, the Indian Army, as is presently constituted, didn't originate only in 1947. It is a continuation of a tradition, and I think all the regimental histories of all the regiments here will tell you campaign in Crimea, campaign in China, the Boxer uprising, the World War I. So the colors which they have all date back to that. So there is a continuum. Now we might say, look, that's very embarrassing for us. Whether it's embarrassing or not, that's the reality. And I think it's important to recognize that's the reality. But and I just want to stress this point a little bit. Therefore, as far as the inheritance and the tradition of the Indian Army is concerned, and in fact the Indian Air Force also to a very large extent, it goes back to wars which were fought earlier. So when we honor and commemorate certain people, when we commemorate the Jodhpur Lancers in Haifa, we are also taking into account the fact that these regiments were subsequently incorporated within the Indian Army. And that's a very important point. And it's important in another respect, because the Great War of 1914-18 left a tremendous scar in the world. It was probably the most divisive, damaging. It sort of wiped out an entire generation in Europe, both of France, Britain, as well as Germany. And in that war, the contribution of India was there. India was perhaps, despite being a subject nation, India was actually given a separate representation in the peace conference at Versailles. The Maharaja of Bikaner and Lord Sinha were the two Indian representatives. No other subject nation ever took place. So India's contribution was there. Today we have sometimes the contribution of India is merged into the contribution of the Commonwealth. There are gates in London and there is a gate in Ypres, which commemorates the Battle of in the battlefields of Flanders. Where there is a gate, there are gates which commemorate those. But a separate cemetery, a separate memorial for Indians has been now unveiled again in France, as the Vice President has done so. So, in 2014, when Mr. Modi went for the first time to France, I think it was Belgium, and he actually put a wreath. That was the first Indian Prime Minister who actually went and honored this to show the element that we recognize our contribution, and it's shown the element of continuity. Now, let's not draw exaggerated sort of conclusions from there to say that, we inherited the colonial state, etc., etc. All I'm saying is that the Indian Army's traditions date back to a long time. And it's important, just as the army recognizes those traditions, let the nation also recognize those traditions. And we've added today, and you can see Lieutenant Colonel Bhatt wearing the marigold along with the poppy. And I think we've added our unique contribution to this to show that it was our soldiers who played a role. It may not have been our war, but it was our soldiers.
But it was our soldiers who
And
fought that particular
to
war.
add to that, it is the sons and grandsons of those soldiers who are still serving and who've done the country
In the
proud.
Indian Army.
Done the country proud in so many wars right from 47 onwards.
So the continuity remains there. Let's bring in General Arora. General Arora, the points which have been put forth by Mr. Dasgupta here on celebrating that legacy which we have.
Commemorating is more the word.
Yes,
Commemorating rather with that
fully with
legacy
you there.
and you know, being proud of what our soldiers achieved in that war, despite it not being the war in which India participated. It was not our war.
Exactly. Let me try and explain a different aspect to this question. You see, when World War I broke out and the British decided to send initially 3 Indian divisions, that time we had a Peshawar division, a Rawalpindi division, Quetta division, Lahore division, and then we had Meerut, Lucknow, Mau, Sikandrabad and Pune divisions. There were 9 divisions. Many of them were disbanded after the war. At the end of the war, some of them were disbanded overseas. Some were raised overseas. For example, the divisions from 10 to 18, with 13 missing, 13 was considered unlucky. They were raised, some of them in India, some of them abroad. Most were disbanded before the Second World War. Now, today, those which were raised in the Second World War have some continuity with the formations and units of the Indian Army.
Okay.
Those of First World War either do not have continuity, there has been a break. Many of the formations and units do not even consider those to be their predecessors. Some do, who go back, as Mr. Dasgupta said, to the 18th century, where they trace their raisings. So this disconnect also prevents them from, say, sort of celebrating the achievements of those formations. And after independence, some of them went to Pakistan.
Okay.
After independence, the 2.5 million army was reduced to 350,000, and then it was subsequently raised again. So many of the present formations and units and regiments.
Has the disconnect being the reason behind us
this
not
is
being able to
this is one
recognize
of the
them?
reasons. But like in the Second World War, my battalion participated, and our delegations still go regularly to the battlefields of Casino and other places to pay their reverence at the war cemeteries which are maintained there. So that kind of pride, celebration and recognition continues to take place. But World War I formations is a slightly different story. Both World War I and II were somebody else's war. We were we were like slaves having been sent to fight somebody else's war. We were ordered. Our soldiers were very simple, uneducated. They went for their namak nishan and, for their own regiment's pride that they took part, and they excelled out there. So, but also remember, what point Mr. Dasgupta has missed out is, after independence, the dispensation, the political dispensation, played down the role of the Indian Army as well. It's well known that the first Prime Minister thought that Indian Army has no role, police would do, but it turned out otherwise, especially because of the 62 war. So, the Indian Army's contribution, First World War, Second World War, and even, let's say, in UN peacekeeping operations, 1953, the Korean Armistice, the Yugoslav peacekeeping, where we sent General Nambiar, all these bright achievements of Indian military leaders have also not been celebrated or recognized that much by the Indian government. Only lately this has started.
Okay, let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Bhatt on this again. Colonel Bhatt, if you look at all these comments which have come in from all of you, one thing which is common here is that we didn't do enough to commemorate our martyrs of the World War I, and now we are doing it. One question which arises is why we didn't do it, and two, that continuity which remains, which each one of you is talking about, Isn't that something which is a moment of pride for all of us?
Let me clarify. Mr. Dasgupta has come out with some very valid observations. So has Ravi. But in these decades, you can say all 67 years after independence, the regiments of the Indian Army were commemorating, observing every battle on a day of the First World War or the Second World War. Yes, like Major General Arora brought out, the political dispensation didn't ever think, I mean, those were the times when we heard, oh, that was not our war. It was not our war, but it is these 1.5 million who established the reputation of the Indian soldier as the best. I'm no boasting about it.
So that,
as the best in the world.
So that connect was there as far as military establishment is concerned, but public memory is something which is...
My regiment, Hodson's Horse, 4 Horse, it has just recently, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu going to Cambrai Day, it was the 100th Cambrai Day that my regiment celebrated now recently. And it's not only that, the various other battle honor days of the First World War, Second World War, and of course, all the wars that we participated in after independence, which are observed, where on every of these days we pay, tributes to our comrades who laid down their lives. We don't forget.
May I just add
yes,
one
Mr.
thing? The reason why this achievement, this role of Indian Army in World War I and World War I was understated for so long had two reasons. One is, A, because as has been mentioned, within India, we tried to underplay it. Number two, India as a power in the world didn't matter that much. Today, I think it matters in both respects. The government of India, the people of India, the armed forces of India have decided to resurrect that history, commemorate it. That's very important, number one. Number two, this commemoration, this honoring of the Indian contribution in World War I is also an attempt really to say that India today matters far more. And I think it's also a recognition. Today's the honor which was bestowed on the Indian Army in France, which Mr. Venkaiah Naidu inaugurated, I think is just a very small but very important and a symbolic reflection of that the Indian Army matters, India matters, and therefore we must give it the pride of place in our history. That's what Europe is saying. That's what America is saying. And that, to my mind, is also important. Take that into account.
Very valid point again. To add to that, just see the Indian Army today, or for the last couple of decades, has been in tremendous demand by a whole lot of friendly countries' armies to have joint exercises with. That's because these countries which come to us and say we want to have military exercises with you, they're acknowledging our expertise in all the kinds of operations of counter-insurgency, counter-terrorism particularly, and even other forms of warfare in which in the past Indian armed forces have excelled in.
Okay.
And it's a professional army. That's a very, very important point which is to be noted. The fact that it is a professional army, it is not a political army, it doesn't get involved in coups and all those sort of things.
Something which was established from World War I itself, from the beginning.
It's been there for a long time, and that tradition is commemorated, that tradition is enshrined into the ethos of the military, and it's recognized. And I think that facet of the Indian Army is recognized.
Let's have the concluding comments from General Ravi.
In conclusion, I just want to narrate a small story, a real story, in 1 minute.
Yeah, let's keep it a little quick.
Okay. During the 65 war, all the Western countries, they stopped supplies of arms and ammunition to India and Pakistan both. We were operating AMX tanks, and the ammunition was being supplied by a French company, this being a French tank, and that company representative in India was one late Major General Rudra. He was contacted by the government and told Can you arrange supply of the ammunition we need very badly? It's to be air flown. He was sent to France, where he met his company representatives, and he said, and he was told that you will have to meet the defense minister. It was arranged, and he went to the defense minister and he said, Minister, I have shed blood for France. I was wounded in the Battle of Ypres. Now is the time. I have come to request for your help. My country needs AMX tank ammunition. Please provide. The ammunition was flown that night to India. This is the kind of bond we have for the countries where we have shed our soldiers'
well,
blood.
that's a befitting example which explains how Indian soldiers, valor, and the kind of participation they had in World War I, their contribution is something which is a reason for pride, and their glory is ultimately India's glory. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Television.